Hey writers, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, I'm Rita. I'm an aspiring fantasy author who's currently working on a little novel that's loosely based on Mulan. I also have a degree in English literature, which means that my obsession with books is professionally certified. Today, we're going to be talking about how to plot a fantasy novel like a pro, step by step. We're going to discuss everything from your core premise to common mistakes to tools that you can use to make plotting easier for yourself. Before I get into all of that, I just want to let you know that this video is based on a blog post that's available on my website. I'll link it in the description below if you want a deeper dive. And that blog comes with like a bunch of checklists, so I definitely recommend giving it a read. Okay, grab your tea, grab your coffee, grab whatever else you want to drink. Let's plot your book. So before I get into the steps, I want to talk a little bit about why plotting actually matters. So obviously there are writers who swear that winging it works for them, and that's totally valid. But when you're writing fantasy, plotting can actually be your best friend because your world is not simple. You likely are going to have like magic rules, you're going to have prophecies, you're going to have political drama, you're going to have like fantasy creatures. You're going to be creating whole worlds from scratch, and plotting essentially keeps all of that from collapsing in on itself. It gives your twists purpose, it gives your character arcs direction, and it's going to leave your readers feeling like everything is intentional. Okay, so step one is starting with your core idea. Before you even touch an outline, you need clarity on what your story is about. So let's build it from the ground up. Here are some questions that I like to ask myself before I start outlining. The first question is, what is the heart of my story? Like, is it revenge? Is it found family? Is it forbidden magic? And then what is the hook that makes my version of that idea stand out from the rest? So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm writing about a rebellion against like a tyrannical king who uses dark magic to control his people, okay? It's simple, it's clear. And then once you have that, you can start asking yourself questions like, who's leading the rebellion, why now, and what's at stake? If you're not able to summarize your premise in one sentence, then you're not ready. So do that first, and it'll make everything else a lot easier. Step two is choosing the plot structure. You don't need to swear loyalty to a single structure forever. You can just pick one for now to guide you, and then if you want to make changes later on or you want to switch to a different structure, that's totally fine. Here are a few macro level options that you can use right away. And by macro level, what I mean is it'll help you with like the big picture stuff. So the first plot structure that probably everybody knows is the hero's journey. It's your classic quest. I actually have a free hero's journey template that you can download on my website. I'll link it in the description below so that it's easier for you to access. So yeah, so there's the hero's journey plot structure. There's also the 3-act structure, which is clean, has easy pacing. There's the 7-point structure. It has like tight turning points. There's the episodic arcs. Those are great for like multi-POV or sprawling sagas. And if you read my blog post, I go into detail for each one of these. But whichever one you pick, map it against your character arc. Your plot and your characters should be intertwined always. They shouldn't live in separate vacuums. The next step is mapping out your story beats. And this is going to be the micro level stuff, okay? This is where you zoom into your plot. And I'm going to tell you a little anecdote about why this step is so important when you're plotting your fantasy novel. So I didn't take story beats seriously. I actually didn't know anything about story beats up until my developmental editor basically staged an intervention for me. So a few years back, when I was working on a different novel, I hired a developmental editor halfway through because I just felt like I had hit a brick wall with my plot. And she immediately asked me if I had filled out a beat sheet. I just stared at her and I was like, no. Also, what the hell is a beat sheet, right? I had mapped out my plot in my head and I had written some notes in a notebook, but that was essentially it. So she walked me through why a beat sheet matters and essentially how every major turning point connects, how your midpoint twists set up your climax, why Act 2 always like collapses without a real plan. And it was genuinely a light bulb moment for me. Once I started mapping out my beats, the story actually held together instead of imploding at the midpoint. That's why I'm so passionate about this step, okay? Because it's not just BS. A beat sheet can be a lifesaver for fantasy plots. So your core beats are your roadmap. So there's the inciting incident, there's the first threshold, there's the midpoint twist, there's the climactic showdown, there's the resolution. So those are the core beats. And if you lock those beats in, your book suddenly feels possible, okay? It suddenly feels like you're not gonna get stuck halfway through. I actually sell a beat sheet that follows the exact same beats my developmental editor taught me. It also comes with like prompts and examples for each beat so that you're not just staring at a blank page wondering what the midpoint is actually supposed to be. And in that beat sheet, I also included pre-filled sheets for Lord of the Rings and Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas so that you understand exactly what's expected from you for each beat. Obviously, if you don't want any spoilers, it's too late for Lord of the Rings. But if you've never read Throne of Glass and you're intending to, then all you need to do is not look at the tab where those examples live. You can just delete them if you want to. But if you've read the books or you don't care, it's a great way to show you what you need to be doing. So anyway, so I'll link that beat sheet in the description below if you want to check it out. Step 4 is building subplots that actually matter. So fantasy readers love layers, right? It's what makes fantasy so much fun to read. And obviously you know this because you yourself are I hope that you are a fantasy reader. Otherwise, I don't know how you'd be writing a fantasy novel. But anyways, so before you throw in subplots like political alliances or slow burn romance or whatever else, you need to ask yourself one thing. Does the subplot change something in your main storyline? So your subplot should either develop your protagonist, so like push them or expose their flaw or force a decision, or it needs to raise the stakes of the main conflict, like complicate the situation or escalate tension or limit options. If it doesn't do either of those things, cut it. Cut it out. Save it for another book, save it for your sequel, save it for another world. It doesn't belong in this one. Another thing for subplots is track how each subplot resolves. Because if a subplot vanishes without a payoff, that feels like just a dropped thread and your readers are going to notice. So make sure that each of your subplots has a satisfying conclusion. Step 5 is use your world to drive the plot. So in fantasy, your setting isn't passive. Every piece of your world, like the terrain, the magic, the politics, the history, all of that should force your characters to make decisions that they wouldn't face anywhere else. In fact, what I want you to do is I want you to think of your world as its own character with its own agenda. It should block paths, it should reveal clues, it needs to complicate choices, it needs to expose weaknesses. Your world should create conflict, and you should use that, and you should weaponize it. The next step is fleshing out your characters. So your plot only works if the people inside it care about what's going on. So if you're working on your protagonist, obviously they need a strong goal, they need something to lose, they need something to gain, and they need a flaw that keeps messing everything up. If you're working on your villain, make sure that they think that what they're doing is right. Okay, because fantasy villains who are just evil for the sake of being evil, that's so boring. If you're creating your villain, you need to make sure that they have their own backstory, that they have some kind of history that made them who they are today. They need something that's driving them. They need their own goals and their own motivations. Your villain needs to think that what they're doing is the right thing to do, okay? They need to be multidimensional, just like your protagonist. Also, when you're creating your side characters, obviously they need to be like challenging or annoying or supporting your protagonist. But more than that, you need to make sure that they also have their own backstories, that they also have their own goals, that they have ambitions of their own, because otherwise you're just gonna feel like filler instead of real people. Now, I wanna talk about the most common mistakes people make when plotting their fantasy stories. One of the most common mistakes is starting too late or starting too early. So let me explain. If you drop readers straight into the chaos without any grounding, they're not gonna understand what's going on, they're not gonna understand why anything matters. Alternatively, if you spend too long describing their daily life or their routines or their backstory, your readers are going to lose patience. They're going to get bored even before the plot actually starts. The sweet spot is showing your protagonists normal, just long enough to establish what they're about to lose, and then introduce the disruption or early tension quickly. The second biggest mistake that people make is what I like to call the middle sag. The middle collapses when the protagonist stops making active choices. If scenes start feeling repetitive, it actually means that the story isn't escalating anymore. Your midpoint should change the context of the conflict, and everything leading up to it should push your characters into tight corners or harder decisions or higher stakes. The third most common mistake is too many plot threads. Fantasy obviously tempts writers to add every cool idea that comes to mind, but every new thread that you add is going to divide the reader's attention. if a subplot doesn't directly like shift the stakes or alter the protagonist's path or pay off at a major turning point, it is just a distraction from your main plot. You only want to use threads that strengthen the spine of your main story. The fourth most common mistake, and this is like a huge mistake, is breaking your world rules. Really good fantasy books, they feel real because they are consistent, especially when it comes to like your magic system, right? If your magic suddenly works differently or like a forbidden spell becomes conveniently allowed all of a sudden, your readers are not going to think like, oh, that's a cool twist. They're going to think you cheated. Once you establish clear rules like magic limits or political systems or geography or even your lore, you need to stick to those rules. You can't just change them halfway through. Your reader's going to notice and they're not going to be impressed by that. The fifth most common mistake that people make is creating weak stakes. If failure doesn't cost your protagonist something personal or significant, the plot has no tension. The stakes that you create, they can be external. So let's say a kingdom that falls. They can be internal, like self-worth or identity. They can also be relational, so like losing somebody. Or what you can do is you can use all three, right? You can use external stakes, internal stakes, and you can use relational stakes. But what you need to keep in mind is they need to be clearly defined and they need to escalate as the story progresses. And the last mistake that I want to talk about is Deus Ex Machina. This is when the story solves a major problem with sudden luck or surprise power or information that the character couldn't possibly have known. A classic example of this is when the Eagles come and rescue Frodo and Sam from Mount Doom in Lord of the Rings, right? There's no setup that they're coming. There's no actions that the characters take to earn that rescue. And there's really no logical reason that those Eagles would arrive at that exact moment. They just appear out of nowhere and they fix an impossible situation. So obviously Tolkien gets away with it because he's Tolkien. But for most writers like you and me, this kind of rescue kills the tension. Your solutions need to come from the choices that your characters make and not just out of the blue. Now, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is how to stay flexible without losing your plot. Because a lot of writers think that, oh, if I plot out my story, it's going to trap me somehow. And that is simply not true. And the way not to get trapped with like a plot or an outline that you're creating is giving yourself permission. So if you're using a beat sheet, let's say, give yourself permission to adjust those beats if necessary. Give yourself permission to rewrite your scenes, to remove characters, to change subplots, to even like follow your protagonist when they do something unexpected, right? If you're used to writing, you know that sometimes your characters just have a mind of their own and they make like different decisions that you weren't necessarily planning. Let them do that. Don't think that you need to stick to every single thing that you've written in your outline, every single beat that you've created. You don't need to. The plot structure that you've created, it's just a structure. It's a guide. It's your skeleton. If there's something that needs to change, by all means, change it. It's okay. The plot outline is not meant to cage you in any way. You are allowed to make changes along the way. All right, so that's it for today's breakdown on how to plot a fantasy novel like a pro. I hope this helped you see your story a little more clearly now. If you found this useful, definitely hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss future videos. I create videos about world building, character arcs, even like fantasy writing and world building tools that you can use. And before you go, I'd love to hear from you. So drop a comment below about what part of plotting that you most struggle with. You know, is it the middle? Is it subplots? Is it the magic rules? Is it something else completely? Whatever it is, tell me about it below. I respond to pretty much everyone. And who knows, your question might inspire a future video. Thanks for hanging out with me and happy writing. See you next time.